Hello, my name is Jay. Welcome back to the Ludiverse. I have a very special guest with me today. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Hello there, Jay. Thank you for having me on your podcast. My name is Elizabeth Hendrick, and I'm the author of Exodai, which is my memoir that I've just published in September last year.
And she was kind enough to send me a copy of her book, and it took me longer to read than it probably should have because honestly, there were some parts where I had to pause to absorb what I had read, and a couple sections I actually had to read again to make sure I understood what I was reading. It's very raw, very emotional. I highly recommend it to anybody who has any interest in any section of BDSM at all. All of it may not apply to you, but there are parts of it that could spark something for you. So you originally are from England.
Yes, I'm British. I live in Japan at the moment, where I've been for the last 10 years. And it was in Japan where I first got into the fetish scene. But I was always interested in bondage as a child. I just never explored until I was about age 27, 28. And then the whole world opened up to me. And I've sort of not really looked back, except to write my memoir.
Well, it's always best to keep looking ahead in life. The beginning of the book where you were discussing your childhood, it resonated with me on a level that I didn't expect it to because I started thinking about like, yeah, I was having thoughts about this kind of stuff at a young age, and I didn't have anybody that I could talk to about it.
Mm.
I kind of understood what you were going through because, as you said in your book, like you didn't know who to talk to, and people just didn't seem to understand. Well, okay, you kind of explained most of it in your book, but like, was it a gradual learning to accept that this was a part of who you are, or was there like a one day a revelation?
Well, there are two aspects to my sexuality. First and foremost, I'm a lesbian, and I was very aware that I was attracted to girls from a very young age. And it didn't present itself as a problem initially because I was so naive and so young, and people didn't understand it. But when I hit puberty, and everybody in the class knew that I was in love with a girl called Alexandra, my period started, my classmates all wanted to know, well, how do you feel about Alexandra now? And of course, I said no difference. I still fancy her. I still adore her. And at that point, it was as if my class stepped back en masse and said, well, you've got a problem. And that led to me not accepting my sexuality as a lesbian. And at the same time, in parallel, I had these strange fantasies about being tied up, and I really didn't know what that was, and I wasn't open about it. I didn't tell anybody about it, and it wasn't until I was age 27 that I started to talk about it and explore it. And in that environment, I was already an adult. So the answer to your question was it an overnight revelation that I suddenly found my sexuality as a submissive, adoring the dominatrix as a submissive. I found my sexuality and almost felt like I was born again overnight. And I tell that story in my book. I think it's chapter 8. I go to an S&M party, and it's the first time I've been on the S&M scene for a year at that point, but I've not actually explored and done anything myself. And for the first time, I get involved. And a Finnish friend called Astrid in the book, she starts to tie me up, and then I'm attracted to this Japanese dominatrix and allow her to whip me, and it's almost like I'm born again that night. And so that was a massive transformation from not knowing I was a submissive to wholeheartedly jumping in to being a submissive and embracing that part of my sexuality. But at the same time, I still loved women, and I hadn't accepted my sexuality as a lesbian. So the two aspects of my sexuality, it's quite interesting. I had this self-denial and self-loathing because of being a lesbian and having been brought up as a Christian and thinking it was an abomination before God. And this very kinky fetish side to me, which I accepted almost as soon as I discovered the real me there, and never had any guilt, and was very confident as a submissive and thereby attracted very good dominatrices into my life. But I had this sort of double persona going on. So although I loved myself as a submissive, I didn't love myself as a lesbian. And that led me to getting into some very torturous situations because I wasn't enjoying pain as a submissive, but it fed the guilt about being a lesbian.
On the subject of being raised a Christian and trying to debate that with your being a lesbian, that's actually a part that my wife wanted me to mention because it really sparked her, because she was raised Catholic and she's bisexual, and she, even to this day, was still kind of battling that, trying to reconcile the faith that she was brought up with who she knows she is. And actually reading that in your book helped her understand a lot. So I wanted to thank you for her for that part.
Wonderful. Well, this is the ultimate aim, is that my book will help people, and whatever your situation is. And I think in particular, it helps people coming to terms with aspects of their sexuality, particularly relating it to a childhood brought up in religion. And I've had a lot of feedback similar, that it's been really helpful for people. They found it very relatable, and they could see that they weren't alone in those dilemmas that you go through during your adolescence. And I think we bury a lot of that guilt as an adult, and then it manifests in our adult life in attracting toxic relationships into our sort of experience. And for me, I was just having lots of toxic relationships because I hadn't learned to love myself. And I had accepted myself eventually on a conscious level for being a lesbian, probably when I was about age 29. But I hadn't accepted it subconsciously. And it was through this relationship with this dominatrix during my late 30s and early 40s that I finally came to terms with my sexuality and learned to love myself. But it had originated because of my Christianity. And I think I just read the Bible with a naive adolescent mindset and couldn't find anything that approved homosexuality. And there's nothing about lesbianism in the Bible, of course, because it's already misogynistic if we start there. So It's all about men. But for me, homosexuality was tantamount to lesbianism. I thought, well, if homosexuality is wrong, then probably lesbianism is wrong. I mean, that was my sort of interpretation, very naive interpretation. And, I was okay wearing mixed fabric clothing. I was okay eating shelled fish. But it wasn't okay to be gay as far as I was concerned, because of something written in Deuteronomy or Leviticus, or what Paul was harping on about Sodom and Gomorrah and everything. All of this just made me feel horrible about myself. And it was very, very just my own interpretation. And I guess what people were saying around me in the religious communities. I think in a lot of religious communities, you have a lot of people who are very straight, and that's their life experience. And they've never been forced to go out of the comfort zone because they've not come across it. And as soon as they find something that's out of their comfort zone, that they can't find something on the shelf to deal with it, they become fearful and start to tell you, you've got a problem, you need to change. And that's really what was happening to me. One of my best friends at university was a born-again Christian. And eventually, I just had to stop being friends, because even as an adult, even when I had accepted my sexuality, she couldn't accept it. And we just sort of parted companies. And I think it's very sad, really, that some people are so bent on their religious interpretation that they can't open their mind to the fact that it's entirely natural. Our sexuality is entirely natural. So I can imagine the book helps people who are going through those issues. And many people as adults are still struggling with their sexuality because of stuff that was inbred when they were a child about how wrong it is to be this, that, or the other.
Yeah, I see it all the time, like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, all this stuff, talking about how like homosexuality is an abomination and all this stuff, but nobody can point to an actual chapter verse. But you got lucky enough and you found a priest who could explain it to you in very clear terms.
Yeah. He literally said, your God is the potter, you are the clay. And he was a very liberal-minded priest. And again, this is in my book, this scene where I go to talk to the priest, and I go to see him, thinking to myself, well, if it is wrong to be gay before God, well, I'm prepared to take on a life of chastity and maybe become a nun. My faith was so strong, I was ready to do that if that was the sort of case if that was the feedback I got from this priest. And fortunately for me, I spoke to the right priest. He was liberal minded and gave me very sage advice. But having said that, although I accepted my sexuality consciously, it didn't filter down into the psyche. So I was still hardwired to hate myself, which is why I continued to attract toxic relationships until literally 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm now 52. So it took me until about the age of 45 to properly learn to love myself through and through, consciously and subconsciously. But I was very lucky because in my late 20s, I had the right conversation with the right priest at the right time.
Well, I am glad that you got to where you are now and happy with yourself, because I got to admit, reading through the book, you had a bit of a rough road.
It's very tough. Yeah.
It was some of the parts were a little hard to read. Like I said, I had to pause reading for a little while to absorb properly what I had read and come to terms with it and then get back into it. So, I mean, it's not like a horror story. I don't want anybody listening to think that there's going to be scenes like, where you're getting beat half to death or anything. But there were some that were just really like you had some pretty intense scenes mixed with some really intense emotions that me personally, I had to stop. It hit me personally. So that's just how I am.
Yeah, not everyone makes it through my book, and it is because there are some very raw, graphic scenes. And I've been likened to Stephen King in terms of how I write. I write very descriptively, and for me, that's a compliment, of course. And there are two main torture scenes when I'm tortured by Tomo, the main dominatrix in the book. Mm-hmm. And I go into very graphic detail about how she suspends me with rope and how she uses electricity to torture me, how she uses her whip. And there's very little sex in this book. There's a bit of lesbian sex in the earlier chapters, but in the BDSM part of the book, which is probably the core of the book, second half of the book is my relationship with Tomo. Most of the BDSM is what I call sort of love, ecstasy, agony, and pain. And I had sort of got into this place where I was putting women on pedestals, and my quintessential expression of love became to suffer torture for that woman. And BDSM was a great framework for that. But in fact, I was being abused, and I was allowing this dominatrix to abuse me because she was basically a sadist and a narcissist. And she just loved the fact that someone would take all this pain and suffering just to show their love for her. And she thrived on that. And I thrived on it too. So, I mean, we're in a codependent relationship. We plugged into each other perfectly, but it was ultimately a dysfunctional and toxic relationship. But yes, the scenes in the book are very graphic. And there have been some people who've not been able to read through because, I mean, so on YouTube, occasionally a video pops up in my homepage and it looks like it's a car crash or it's a roller coaster crash. And I can't watch stuff like that because it triggers me. It's too traumatic to watch real pictures of people having a hideous accident. I can't watch. I have to turn the other way. And I think my book is a bit like that. It's not hideous road crashes, and it's obviously you don't see videos, you don't see any pictures. It's all the written text. But I think for some people, particularly empaths, they find it very hard to read because it's a true story and they're reading about this girl's real suffering, pain and mental. And I know that some people can't get through the book because of that. And it does have trigger warnings. But the people who are sticking with it and who are getting through it and like yourself, rereading to understand and just sticking with it, I think they're getting a tremendous amount out of the book. And I've had a lot of people write to me personally as the author and say how grateful they are that I shared this story, shocking though that it is, that I would be prepared to put myself out there because they're finding it very helpful. And that means so much to me. That's really what my ultimate goal was with this book, was to help other people who were in relatable situations.
It's a very noble goal.
Thank you.
I do have to admit, though, the scene with Tomo where she was using the electricity, where it got really kind of intense, I was actually worried for you. I half expected like the next page I was going to turn over and you were being admitted to a hospital because the session had gotten so severe that you had like an open wound or you had lost like feeling in your leg or something, because some of the suspension stuff
Yeah.
was like really well described, and like I honestly had fear
Mm,
for you
mm.
in the book, and I was like, oh, what's going to happen? I can't wait to find out, but I'm terrified to find out. So
Right.
the
I
Stephen King
understand that.
connection is very apt.
Yeah, I mean, I look back and I just think, I do think I was a lunatic for putting myself through some of that stuff. I mean, I'm a completely different person now. I've transformed, I've come through that process, that transformation, and I'm really grateful to be on the other side. But I mean, some of the things I was doing, I was an absolute lunatic. And I look back and I just think, wow, how did I manage to come out relatively unscathed? I mean, I've got no scars. I don't know, maybe when I'm older, I might find that my lower back is a little bit more crippled than it should be, but I'm absolutely fit and well and healthy to tell the tale. I do think that there was a little bit of permanency in the mental trauma, because I do tend to get not highly strung, but I tend to get quite nervous when I have an event or something and everything needs to come together and be perfect. I tend to get a little bit more nervous about those things than I used to. And I think that's because of what she put me through mentally. That's the possible only long-term damage, is a little bit to my mental chill state. And I'm often not very chilled in the run up to events where there are lots of moving parts. I'm also a control freak, which is a bit odd for a submissive, but that was always a challenge for me. But yeah, some of the things I went through, I do find it amazing that, like you said, with electric torture, I mean, things can go really horribly wrong if you're just plain unlucky. And I mean, when I was in the UK in the London BDSM scene, I remember meeting a man in a wheelchair, and he had had a rope suspension accident. And it was no fault of the mistress he was with. She was an absolute professional, knew what she was doing. Just something somewhere slipped, whatever, and he fell on his back and was paralyzed from the waist downwards. And I'm just so grateful that nothing like that happened to me. And it really could have done. Took some huge risks with these dominatrices. I did, really did. I would never go back to that kind of relationship. I still love bondage, and I still love getting wrapped up in latex, but there's no pain for me anymore. There's no submission except in the context of role play for the play that we're doing at the time. There's no 24/7 enslavement for me anymore. I've moved on from that, I'm happy to say, because I've learned to love myself. And that's why I left Tomo, is because I learned to love myself through that relationship. And I had to turn around to her one day and say, look, I'm sorry, I have to leave you, because I've learned to love myself, and therefore I can't be in this relationship anymore. And I think she was quite devastated, but not as long as me, because I still loved her and didn't want to leave her, but I knew I had to for myself.
Those are usually the hardest ones to get out of, when they're bad for you, but you still are deeply invested in it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's interesting that the tricks we play on ourselves, our mind, because essentially I'm still unpacking some of this, so some of this is still new thought that's coming out, but I was addicted to torture. I had become addicted to torture, and it was my quintessential expression of love. And if you're addicted to cocaine or crack, as long as you've got money, you can on the whole, you can buy this commodity and use it. If you're trying to if your commodity is a third party that can turn around and decide whether or not they're available, it adds another really difficult dimension for the mental state. And so, of course, my dominatrix, she would never torture me as much as I wanted to. So I was constantly yearning for torture. And it was ridiculous. I mean, I was so toxic. And there were two sides of me. There was the demon on the left shoulder and the angel on the right shoulder. And the demon, anytime I was tired, drunk, exhausted, or angry, I was telling myself, get out of this relationship. It's no good for you. And anytime I was spiritually uplifted, if I'd been to church, if I'd been praying, and I was going to church all through this was going on, by the way, or if I'd been to a yoga class and was feeling very, very clean-headed, I would think, no, I've got to stay in this relationship because I am going to save her. I'm going to save her from her inner demons. So I wasn't looking at my own inner demons. I was thinking she has inner demons and I'm the one who's come to save her. And it's all going to happen one day in a session. She's going to break down and I'm going to help her release her demons. And I actually had this idea I was going to exorcise her demon. And that was all a game I played on myself. That was a mind trick that I convinced myself it was the nobler path to stay in the relationship, because by taking all this suffering and pain and agony, I was going to help her grow and save her. And so this was a trick that I played on myself, so that I thought that my angel inner voice was telling me to pursue the nobler path, which was to stay in the relationship to save this woman from her demons. But in fact, that was a deceit that I told myself in order to keep myself enchained into this relationship, because I ultimately, at that point, didn't love myself and I wanted to stay in there and keep being punished. But slowly, because I'd reached the absolute of zero of submission, slowly but surely, I started to pull myself up by the bootstraps, and these green shoots of recovery started to grow inside me and started to challenge the relationship from a point of self-love. And that was about a 6-month period that saw things changing in the relationship until finally I love myself and I have to leave this relationship. That's a lot, a lot to take in there.
The experiences that you went through, the good and the bad, all came together to make you who you are now, one way or another.
Correct.
Do you feel that if you could go back to the start of it all, not back to school when you were first learning that, but when you first forayed into actively participating in S&M, would you do it again? If you had the knowledge you have now, would you do it all over again? Or I mean, I imagine like the Toma thing would have been different.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jay. I mean, knowing what I know now, I won't go back into an S&M relationship like that. Knowing what I know now, I mean, I'm a different person. I love myself, and I look back and I think what the things I did were just pure lunatic. But I didn't know that at the time. And I think we all make decisions based on the circumstances at the time, and hindsight's a great thing. But I think if I went back, I really wouldn't change anything, I don't think. Because those were the steps that I had to take. Now, I feel like that was BDSM for me became my therapy. And it was through that experience, I sort of think that Tomo had to strip me down to nothing so that I found it in myself to dig deep and find my own inner love without any crutches, without any support, with nothing, no self-esteem or nothing. And if there were another way, I would have chosen it. If there were another way that meant going into heavy therapy and having a really sort of yoga, clean Tibetan monk, meditative, therapeutic approach, that would have been the better course of action. But I don't know if that would have worked as quickly and as aggressively and as appropriately as the relationship that I put myself in. So it's difficult to say, would I do it all again? I think I probably would, because I can't see that an alternative route would have brought me to this position of knowing and self-love in the same time frame. Yet I do look back and think it was crazy what I did. But I think when you start a journey like that, you don't even know if you sometimes don't even know it's the beginning of a 10, 12, 7-year journey. If you know it's going to be 7 years, you can't take the first step. So it's better the devil you don't know sometimes, because you just go in blind and you take it day by day. And I think because of that, I could get through to the end. But if I'd known in advance, I don't think I could have made the journey. So looking back now, I think I wouldn't have done anything differently, but I couldn't have done it if I had known how long the journey and how difficult it would have been.
Okay, that makes sense. For anybody that's just starting out in S&M, if they were to read your book and then, say they read your book and then they wanted to know what you thought about, like, is it a bad thing to get into this lifestyle? What kind of advice would you have for somebody just starting out?
I don't think it's a bad lifestyle at all. Well, BDSM is multifaceted, and there are many people coming into it, practicing it, coming from many different sets of circumstances and for many different reasons. I was sexually attracted to bondage. That's why I was there in the first place. And that sexual attraction to bondage was innate. It's still with me now. If I want to masturbate, that's what I think about, being wrapped up in latex and so on. But the pain didn't turn me on. So whilst I was a submissive, I wasn't a masochist. Now, for a masochist, my understanding of a masochist is that they do actually get turned on by pain. And I've heard a theory, and this is a speculative theory. There's no proof of this, but it's a theory that I have heard and I like, is that people who are into BDSM, a lot of them will find that the interest is innate. They may have not explored it when they were a child, but there's something inside them and they know that there's something that they like. And there's a theory that it comes from childbirth. So in the case of masochists who are turned on by pain, they somehow download the pain of the mother during childbirth. They download that same pain through the umbilical cord into their own psyche, and it becomes a cellular experience. And so at a cellular level, they fuse pain and euphoria. And that's why they are attracted as masochists to feeling pain. There's that theory. And similarly, for the feeling of humiliation, sometimes when you're in a medical room for whatever it is, surgery, whatever, sometimes there's a presence in the room. It's a doctor or it's a nurse, and you just don't like their energy and you feel humiliated in a hospital environment. And that could happen with the mother while she's giving childbirth. And in my case, bondage, deeply, deeply being tied up in rubber and latex, I was due. So my birthday's in early November, but I was actually due about 2 weeks before I came out, or 10 days, 12 days. And I started to come out of my mother's womb on the due date. And I don't know that her waters broke, but it seemed like she started to get contractions. And I was starting to come out exactly on my due date, which was something like the 22nd of October. And then after about an hour, I stopped. And the whole thing stopped. And I was like, okay, no, I'm going to stay in here a bit longer. It's too nice. And then they had to induce me 10 days later, because that's what they did back then. And I have a theory that maybe I started to come out, but then got kind of stuck in this position. And so my last 10 days in the womb, I couldn't move and was maybe restricted. So when I was born, I had this great feeling associated with not being able to move and being pinned, hands to the side. So I mean, it's a speculation, but there's a theory that some of these sexual interests come from the experiences we have in childbirth. These can affect us mentally as well, not just sexually. But so that's one theory. So if you are naturally attracted to pain, to humiliation, to bondage, to bring you that sense of euphoria, which ultimately is expressed as a sexual orgasm, there's no reason why you shouldn't be exploring that. Now, the point about new starters in S&M or BDSM is I would always say you must absolutely be open and be transparent and make sure you trust the person you're playing with and get to know them before you play. But if you've got two people coming into an S&M relationship, master and slave, dominatrix and submissive, disciplinarian and submissive, whatever, if you've got two people coming in from a position of confidence and balance and peace, then you can make for a fantastic fusion of energies and an absolute euphoria in that relationship in a very sexual, very BDSM context. And I think this is true of all relationships. You can have two people who come together who are coming from a position of stability, well then, and love, then the relationship by and large will be very fulfilling. But similarly, you can have two people coming in to a BDSM relationship from a position of insecurity and instability, and that's when you have problems. And you can have a whole framework for abuse within the BDSM framework. And I'm afraid it does go on, and it goes on a lot, and you have to look out for it. But the vast majority of people, I think, practicing BDSM are coming at it from a position of strength, stability, and self-confidence. And in those circumstances, you can have a really enlightening, exciting, euphoric experience of nirvana and bliss. But you just need to be very wary of what your limits are. You need to discuss with your partner what's acceptable. You should use safe words. I mean, in my book, I talk about how we didn't use safe words, but you really should use safe words. I mean, having said that, if there was ever any really, really, really obvious problem, like in one of the scenes, I nearly faint, and my dominatrix quickly unties me and puts my head between my knees so the blood flows back into my head. And I didn't need to use a safe word. It was just clear there was a problem. But it's not always clear, so you need to have safe words. So I think BDSM can be bliss, but it can also be very dangerous, and you just have to have your wits about you, is I think my advice.
That's very good advice. The recurring theme that I've come across while interviewing different people has always been communication, and seems like this is no different. A lot of communication is very important.
Communication is definitely very important, and certainly so in BDSM, a lot of the times, if you're the submissive or you're the bottom, you will be going into a situation where maybe you can't communicate very well. Let's say you've got a mask on, you've got a mouth gag, your hands are tied behind your back. It's very difficult to communicate. So it's very important to have the conversation with your partner before going into that. What would be nice? What's acceptable? What can you do? What are you prepared to do? And in some cases, people are prepared to completely surrender and say, you can do whatever you like. Here's our safe word, but you can do whatever you like. And that, that can be total submission, total surrender. It can be very enriching for both sides. But you have to be wary that you might be, as the submissive, you might be going into a position where it's difficult to communicate once you're in the play, once you're in the groove. And similarly, dominatrices or masters must also be sure that they understand they're submissive and they can read their moves. A lot of dominatrices I met in Japan were incredibly intuitive. I mean, they could read me like a book. They could intuit what it was that I wanted, and they would do it. But a lot of the time, what I wanted was what they wanted because I was a submissive. So my euphoria came from them enjoying me suffering for them, and then I would enjoy the fact that they were enjoying my suffering. It was a sort of a vicious circle in the upward direction.
Yeah. So do you have any plans on writing any other books, or is this like a one and done, your story's told?
Well, this is interesting you should say that, because I have had a lot of people who felt that they would like to learn more about the healing process, because the book finishes with, I won't spoil it, but it finishes a little bit abruptly, and then there's some reflections at the end to sort of wrap it up. I mean, one of my reviewers said that they really enjoyed reading the reflections at the end, but for them it was an amuse-bouche and they wanted the whole meal. So I think the natural sequel to this book would be probably starting at my last dinner with Tomo and splitting up with her, and then moving on to the whole healing process, of which writing Exodai was part of the process. It was very cathartic to write the book. And as I said, we were even talking now and I'm still unpacking some of it. But most of the learning has happened. But I still occasionally have revelations. I think, I didn't realize that. Something else, another penny drops. So the next book would be a sequel, which would focus much more on the healing process. And then I've always kept diaries of many of my formidable life experiences. And I would in particular, I tried to launch a film magazine when I was living in London back in 2005, and that's mentioned in Exodai briefly. There's one
Yes.
section on it, but I would quite like to expand that chapter into a book, and that whole experience of being an entrepreneur for 2 years and trying to do a Richard Branson startup project that earns me millions of dollars, but that never happened. My project didn't quite make it there. So there's lots of books on the shelf that diaries that I've got on the shelf that I could turn into books. I think, but at the moment I'm just focusing on Exodai because it's still quite fresh and I still need to do a lot of book promotion. I'm doing a lot of podcasts. In fact, new information coming in. I've actually my book was nominated for an award with one of the big independent publishing book authorities. It's called the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And I was a finalist. My book was a finalist, but get this, it was a finalist for the cover design. I thought, well, so it's not an endorsement of the content, damn it, but it apparently, to win an award, to get nominated as a finalist, so that it's like an Oscar nomination. So I didn't win the Oscar. There was another book that won, and there were 6 finalists. So I was one of the finalists, which is still noteworthy. But to win a finalist nomination for this institution for book cover, they wouldn't give it to a book if the content were not up to par, not up to a good standard. So it's effectively an endorsement of the whole book, but focusing on the front cover, the beautiful red rose splattered in blood against a white background. So anyway, I've won that award, and that means that I've been invited to their award event, which is at the end of June, and hopefully I'm going to go to that. It's in San Diego, but it's very costly because I've got to fly from Japan. So we'll see about that. But all of these things are just leading to the next thing, and then you meet someone, and then that leads to something else, and I do another podcast with other people and stuff. So this year, I'm just going to focus on promoting the current book in hand, and then if that really does well, then definitely I'll look to write a sequel.
Okay, well, congratulations on the nomination.
Thank you very much.
That was, I mean, the book cover is beautiful. It's very artistic. It doesn't exactly tell you what kind of book you're about to get into, but once you read the book, it makes sense.
There's even a scene where there's a red rose and I cut my lips. So the red rose with blood splattered is very appropriate. It was designed by a book cover designer called Tim Barber, who's based in Aldershot. His company is called Dissect Designs. It's in my book, his details, but Dissect with a double S.
Okay.
And he's thrilled. He's absolutely thrilled that his cover won this book award. I mean, I entered it on his behalf. So I entered into 4 different categories, 2 categories for memoir, LGTB non-fiction, and book cover. Book cover was the one that I won the nomination. But it's great. I mean, I get to go there and I'll meet the judges and everything. I mean, maybe I'll find out what they thought of my book's content as well. We'll see.
Well, book is available on Amazon.
Yes.
Is it one that you're also selling in like physical media stores?
So I publish through Amazon KDP, which used to be just ebook, but they now do paperback print book as well. So you can only get Exodai through Amazon, but it's on all the Amazon global markets, and you can get it for your Kindle, or you can get it a paperback printed and sent to you. They print on demand. It's amazing the wonders of technology these days. So if you go onto Amazon, you would need to type in Exodai Hendrick, which is the author name, or Exodai Elizabeth Hendrick. If you just type in Exodai, my book probably won't come up. Certainly not in America and the UK. If you just type in Exodai, my book doesn't come up because I've not sold 1 million copies yet, so I'm not coming up in search just under the name Exodai. And Amazon thinks you're misspelling Exodia. So Exodai Hendrick, that will get you to my book.
Well, and I'll also add a direct link to the book in the show notes.
Thank you.
So if anybody wants to take the easy route, just click and go. Because I firmly believe that anybody with any kind of interest in BDSM needs to read this book.
Absolutely.
And I'm actually probably going to read it again once my wife's done.
Wonderful.
And it's rare that I reread a book this soon. It usually takes me a couple years. But like this story hit me so hard. And I there's probably things that I missed because I was I'm a very visual reader,
Hmm.
and your writing is so descriptive and so detailed that I can actually visualize parts of it. And there may be parts that I was so caught up in the visualization that I actually didn't pay attention to what I was reading. So yeah, I fully plan on rereading the book.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
And again, I am so sorry that it took as long as it did for me to get done with it and back to you for this interview.
Oh, no problem at all. No, everything takes time. I mean, don't worry about that. I'm thrilled that we've been able to meet. And also, I think if you do read the book a second time, it'll be quite interesting now that you've met me, because I mean, you must have imagined a certain character. Now you've met me face to face or through Zoom. And we're actually, although this is an audio recording, Jay and I are looking at each other through a computer, which is nice. He's got a beautiful smile, by the way, everyone. Um, and
Thank you.
yeah, it's probably interesting to meet me now that you've read the book, and then going back to read the book. It will probably help you in some ways now that you've got a little bit more of my personality, understanding who I am and where I'm coming from and where I'm at now.
Honestly, you don't look a whole lot different than how I had visualized you. I was somehow visualizing longer hair,
Did used to be
but
longer.
for the most part, you're very similar, not exact.
Isn't that
Um,
interesting? I'm glad to
but
hear
for
that.
yeah, just with the way everything was being described and everything, you're very similar to how I had pictured you in my head while I was reading. So
Wow.
kudos on that.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm thrilled to hear that. Wonderful. Wonderful.
But yeah, books available. I recommend people go out and buy it. I think while it may be easier to get the ebook version, I think the physical version is a better choice, but that's me personally. I have a tendency to get distracted with electronics, which is why asked for the physical copy instead of the ebook. But I prefer the physical version because it was just easier to keep track of where I was reading and not be distracted by other things. But yeah, however you get it. Honestly, this one deserves to be on a bestsellers list.
Oh, I hope so. Fingers crossed. And if you do read it and like it, do please also write a review, because the more reviews on Amazon, the more Amazon takes me seriously and promotes my book to more people. And it's very good. Their algorithm is very good at targeting people. So I want to get this book into the hands of the right people. And also, a lot of people in the LGTB community, even if they're not into BDSM, are finding it very relatable. So I hope a lot of people get a chance to read it.
But it was wonderful to talk to you. Nice to actually get to meet you, well, screen to screen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay. I really do appreciate you having me. And you've asked some really great questions. And you've really given me a chance to talk about some of the more poignant parts of my book and the wider message as well, which I really appreciate. So thank you so much.
Well, it's like there were other things that I wanted to talk about, but it's like if I talk about this, it's going to spoil this whole like 4 chapters of the book, and I don't want to do that to the people that might want to read it. And
Right.
so I was like, I'll keep it simple.
Yep. Thank you.
You were very informative, very open, and very genuine, very easy to talk to, and you also have a very lovely smile.
Thank you. Bless you.
So, do you have social media where people can learn more about what's going on in your day to day
Yes, I
or your
actually
professional?
I'm on social media in quite a few places, and you can see me reading chapters, well, not chapters, reading excerpts from the book. I did a whole bunch of shorts on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. So my YouTube handle is at Exodai, and that should bring me up at Exodai. Instagram is at Exodai narrated, all one word, because it's me narrating parts of the book. And TikTok is at Exodai Memoir, and I'm also on Twitter, but not properly. So, I mean, I'll give you the links anyway, Jay, so you can put them in the show notes. But basically, my main social media is YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and we'll put the details in the show notes. And you'll
No,
see
Twitter's
some
dying
videos.
anyway, so
Well, I agree. It is. Yes, but the nice thing about Twitter is I can put a short video and I can put a linked. Instagram, the only link you can put is in your bio, and TikTok, you can't put any links until you're a big account. So, and YouTube Shorts now, you used to be able to put a link on the videos. You can't anymore. You can only put a link on big videos. which is really annoying because I just started to do all these shorts. Anyway, there you go. Social media, very, very, very challenging. They also mute me because my channel's got a lot of BDSM stuff, so I don't get as much exposure as if I was talking about, say, Harry Potter or something.
Yeah.
But there it is.
I wish you all the luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you very much, Jay.
And it was lovely talking to you. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that everyone listening has a wonderful day. All of my links will be in the show notes. You know, I still have the Twitter. I've got merchandise, stuff like that. It's all down in the show notes. Please feel free to contact me and let me know what you thought about let me know what you thought about the book, and I'll direct it to her or find her on social media. Tell her directly, please read this book. But until then, I hope everyone just keep communicating and have fun with each other. All right. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Ludiverse. If you have any questions or comments, contact us on Twitter or Facebook. Just search for the Ludiverse. Remember to rate and review wherever you listen. If you want to help support the show, please consider donating to our Patreon.